Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So glad that you're joining us this evening. Please, we're just going to get started shortly. We're just letting people come on in, so we'll just give them a few more minutes as people come on into this presentation. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome. Well, I think that most folks have come on now. I think we can begin. Good evening and welcome. I am so thrilled so many of you have joined us this evening for a workshop-style virtual event entitled Dignity in Dream Identities. I am Dr. Beth-Sarah Wright, and I look forward to our time together, a time to be brave together, to be courageous together, and to create community together as we focus on our dream identities, all through the lens of dignity. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Julie Lytle, who is the Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Director of Distributive and Lifelong Learning Initiatives at Bexley Seabury Seminary. She is a self-described life lover, curious innovator, natural networker, and change navigator. And for tonight, I am grateful that she is also my illustrious partner in assisting me with the questions and conversation for the webinar. Julie? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm very happy to be joining you tonight and to be supporting this wonderful presentation. You'll see on the screen, we have a new program at Bexley Seabury that's extending our degree programs for the Masters of Divinity and Doctor of Divinity into having lifelong learning opportunities. And what I am most pleased about is that we're going to be having Beth-Sarah provide us with a wonderful conversation about being church and representing Christ starting in June, and then again, probably at the end of the year, November, December. So thank you for letting me work with you, and let's have a fun conversation.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you. Please be sure to our attendants tonight, please be sure to give her any questions. We want to create a community that is open and brave, and that we can share some thoughts as we listen to the presentation tonight. So if you have any questions that you are going to send to me, because I am working on this, I might miss them. So please be sure to direct those questions to her, or if you feel comfortable sharing them with the entire community. So I imagine many of us had a lot of hope for 2021. And already in these early days, some of our dreams may have been altered or shattered even. Our personal dreams, what we hope for ourselves, may pale in comparison to what we see around us. Who could have predicted the events of January 6th, the second impeachment of the President of the United States, the continued havoc COVID-19 is wreaking around the country and the world, and not to mention the racial reckoning and the political division that continues to rage all around us. To date, over 395,000 lives have been lost to this virus in the US, and now countries brace for the impact of more contagious virus variants appearing around the world. And the hope of the launch of the vaccine is wavering, it's teetering in its challenging distribution throughout the country. All of this in just 17 days. And in just 3 days, a new president will be inaugurated amidst all of this uncertainty. But it is not lost on me that this weekend is the memorial of a man who sacrificed his life for a dream that changed this country, and a dream that changed the world. Hope remains. Dreams remain. Dreams are essential. Not only can they change your life, but they can change the world. So this evening, we gather to refocus on our dreams for ourselves, what I'm referring to as our dream identities. Now is the time to really lean into those dreams and to make them more of a reality. The dream identity is what drives the purpose of our own journeys towards authenticity, where we aspire to, or what we aspire to, or what we hope for to become our lived identity. I will use the dignity lens from my recent book to, as I said in the invitation, to explore our own barriers to authenticity, excavate our own truths and identity, all on our way to creating sustainable and lasting change. You know, when I wrote this book, I wrote it for institutional aspirations, for schools, for communities, small groups. I was really focused on the institution. But whenever I presented this work in various conferences, people would inevitably come up to me afterwards and say, I need this lens for my own life. So this is my attempt to place the dignity lens on ourselves instead of our institutions. But I warn you, this is hard, brave, and courageous work. Don't expect this to be easy. This set of strategies will not give you answers necessarily, but rather asks provocative questions and invites you to reflect and to grow in some new competencies. I will use some photography and some poetry to engage us, and I will ask you to share and to reflect on these strategies, even in the midst of strangers. So I ask for your bravery and your courage tonight. And if you feel comfortable to share some of your questions, some of your reflections in the chat, which is available and open to all. If you don't feel comfortable, please have a journal or take your notes on your phone. I know some people do that. Have a pen and a pencil, whatever it is, and just jot down some thoughts. Take some notes, pay attention to what you feel in your body and as you think as we go through this lens. It's a new way of looking at yourself and the world around you. This is an invitation to respect, to respect, look again, again, and spect like spectacles, to look, to respect the dignity in yourself. So why don't we just start with a poll, actually. Julie, will you help me with our first poll? So the first poll is just the question. We want to kind of gauge where we all are. How many of you have a dream for your life? Feel free to answer, sharing, just take your time and answer. How many of you have a dream for your life? Julie, let me know when you think we're just about done.
We have about, I think we've got everybody in.
Wonderful.
So here are the results.
Yes. Look at that. I have a dream for my life. That's wonderful. I do not have a dream for my life. About 5 of you are saying that. The majority have a dream, and some of you have had in the past, but have put it aside. Put it to the side just for now. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And Julie, would you share the next poll for me, please? Are you making progress on your life dream? Wow, this is more of a 60-40, more of a split, almost directly down the line. Some people are, some people aren't. And I want you to think about and just reflect on what are those boundaries that are preventing that progress. And I'd like for you to think about what is it that you're doing that's making that progress? What actions and new behaviors have you taken up in order to do that? Just want you to think about those before we go forward. Thank you. All right. Well, I would like for us to actually get in, just dive right in now into the dignity lens. Are you all seeing that lens, Julie? All good? So the dignity lens is not linear, but like our eyes, it is circular, and like a merry-go-round, you can jump on at any time. So just so that you know, if you haven't read this book, the dignity lens actually has 7 tenets, which are each denoted by each letter in the word dignity. So that's where we will begin. For the purposes of tonight, because you can jump on this merry-go-round anywhere, I'd like us to begin with identity. The tenet itself asks, who are we? Our identity is our anchor. It drives our purpose and our work. Of course, remember, I wrote this for institutions. So when we think about this in terms of ourselves, who do we say we are? Remember that our identity includes all of who we are, our histories, our cultures, our upbringings, our hurts, our pains, our joys, our accomplishments, perhaps even the most unflattering interpretations of who we are. It is all of us, and I'd like you to consider that, because you're going to bring all of that to bear in your work, in your progress towards your dream identity. I'd like to share with you this wonderful poem that I recently discovered that captures how this poet reflects on their identity through the lens of dignity. It is entitled Say My Name, and their name is Malaika Gisa Fatafihi, who is a proud Black, Indigenous, Pacifica, and West Asian writer. They descend from the Zagareb and Dawareb tribes of Mer Island and the village of Fahifa in Tonga. Quote, they perform poetry, write criticism, and breathe life into worlds. And I'd like to read an excerpt of this poem as you just meditate on her face, their face for a moment. The poem, Say My Name. My name was my name before I walked among the living. before I could breathe, before I had lungs to fill, before my great-grandmother passed, and everyone was left to grieve. My name was birthed from a dream, a whisper from gods to a king, a shout into the stars that produced another that shone as bright. They held me without being burnt, humming lullabies in pidgin. My name was passed down from my ancestors. They acknowledged my roots grew in two places, so they ripped my name from the ocean and mixed it into the bloodlines of my totems. My name has survived the destruction of worlds and the genocidal rebirthing of so-called ones. So excuse me as I roll my eyes or sigh as you mispronounce my name over and over again, or when you give me another that dishonors my mother and father, that doesn't acknowledge my lineage to my island home or the scents of rainforest and ocean foam. You will not stand here on stolen land and whitewash my name, for it is two words intertwined, holding as much power as a hurricane. Say it right, or don't say it at all. For I am Malaika. I will answer when you call. The reflection for this tenet under identity is this: recognizing it is much easier to share the great parts, the Facebook or Instagram reel of your life. What is the hardest part of your I am statement or your identity for you to articulate? Please feel free to share anything in the chat if you'd like, if you feel comfortable, or simply to write down your thoughts upon hearing that wonderful poem, which I really think captures herself, her story, just in her name, but it's all of it, all of her history. What is the hardest part of your I am or identity statement for you to articulate?
I'm afraid that the chat feature is currently turned off for the participants, but they can feel free to post in the question and answers. And if there's anything that they want me to share, I can pass that on if they put that as a note.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julie. So the next tenet is diversity. The questions I ask for institutions is who is here and who is missing. Assess, interrogate, and leverage the diversity in the community. Dignity connects us regardless of our differences. Leadership expert Ron Heifetz said, and I quote in my book, "People don't learn by staring into a mirror. People learn by encountering difference." We are all different, and we all have dignity. Embrace your unique path, your unique journey. Your timeline is different than another's. Comparison with others is truly futile. No one else is like you. There is no prescriptive way of achieving your dream identity. There are only descriptive ways. What do I mean by that? We can't prescribe one way of getting there. We can only describe the many ways that people have gotten there. And you are at the center of these ways. Be curious about others around you. Be open to learning new perspectives. It helps us to distinguish ourselves, our own path, our own non-negotiables, what we will embrace and what we will hold on to. I wanted to share this lovely quote by Frederick Buechner, which I really appreciate and points to and captures the dignity in all of us, that really we are one and there's more similarities amongst us than there are differences. We all have the same dark secrets and the same bright hopes. We come from the same place and headed in the same direction. About everything else, above everything else, maybe we all want to be known by each other and to know each other. So the question for reflection here is, what have you learned or understood differently from someone else with different views or a different perspective than yours? Remember, we were talking about in terms of this dignity lens, it's always about growing in some sort of capacity. And encountering difference is something that really frightens some of us, puts us in very uncomfortable places. So I wonder how we can truly leverage that diversity, that difference, and manage to somehow gain some understanding. It's difficult, but definitely possible. Again, if you have any thoughts, questions, please feel free to share. The next tenet is yield. And the question we ask is, what do we want our efforts to yield? And how do we know if we've reached our goals? The underlying question here for you is, what do you want? What do you want? It is simple and it is clear. Even Jesus in the Bible asks, what do you want? When the dignity lens is applied to institutional authenticity, yield is grounded in data, both quantitative and qualitative. But for tonight, you might consider, what does your dream identity look like? How is it manifest? What is the feeling or image or sound that captures it? What is that qualitative data that you can use to measure your dream identity? I wanted to share this image. Anyone know who that is? That is Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who survived being shot by the Taliban for wanting to be educated. In this picture, she is covered in cake and confetti after she completed her degree at the University of Oxford in England. Talk about a yield. Talk about attaining that aspiration. And talk about the challenges to getting there. The question for you is, when you consider your yield, what you want, what boundaries are you willing to surmount to achieve your dream identity? What are the boundaries you are willing to surmount to achieve your dream identity? The next tenet, strategy, is transparency. What is our story and how do we tell it? Know the purpose, tell the story. So our stories make us who we are and who we will become. There is not only power in giving language to our stories, there is power in owning our stories and even writing some new endings. Toni Morrison said, language alone protects us from the scariness of things with no names. Language alone is meditation. I contend that stories are the currency for dignity. You tell me your story, I'll tell you mine. And it doesn't have to be a transactional thing either. It can simply be a benevolent sharing of stories. In the dignity lens, we own all parts of our stories, even the parts that we deem too terrible to tell. In sharing our stories, all parts of our stories, we can shed light in the darkness, or healing, or forgiveness, or friendship, or a new way out. A resolution can be revealed. Knowing your story is essential in achieving your aspiration, your dream identity, because your story is going to come to bear in that dream identity. I want to show you here this image. It's part of a larger project of a reconciliation program in Rwanda. The people who agreed to be photographed are part of a continuing national effort toward reconciliation and working close with a nonprofit organization called AMI, or Association Modeste et Innocent. In this program, small groups of Hutus and Tutsis are counseled over many months, culminating in the perpetrator's formal request for forgiveness. If forgiveness is granted by the survivor, the perpetrator and his family and friends typically bring a basket of offerings, and the accord is sealed with song and dance. I'd like to introduce you to two of those. This is Deo Gratias and Cesare. Deo Gratias is on the right. He is the perpetrator, and Cesare, the woman who is the survivor. Deo Gratias said, "When I was still in jail, President Kagame stated that the prisoners who would plead guilty and ask pardon would be released. I was among the first ones to do this. Once I was outside, it was also necessary to ask pardon to the victim. Mother Cesare could not have known I was involved in the killings of her children. But I told her what happened. When she granted me pardon, all the things in my heart that had made her look at me like a wicked man faded away." She says, "Many among us had experienced the evils of war many times, and I was asking myself what I was created for. The internal voice used to tell me it is not fair to avenge your beloved one. It took time. But in the end, we realized that we are all Rwandans. The genocide was due to bad governance that set neighbors, brothers, and sisters against one another. Now you accept and you forgive. The person you have forgiven becomes a good neighbor. One feels peaceful and thinks well of the future." I was always so stunned and astonished by this story, that this is the kind of capacity that we have within us to even forgive and tell the story, tell the deep and trauma and atrocities that you have committed in order to gain some sort of peace. That is stunning to me. I'm always astonished by these people who engage in this work. Bishop Desmond Tutu, who was the architect of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on which this work was modeled after, said upon the creation of that difficult yet integral work, he said, "We contend that there's something called restorative justice, in which the end is not punishment, but healing, rehabilitation, the restoration of harmony, the redressing of imbalances. It is to work for a different kind of society based on transparency and accountability, on the recognition of the infinite worth and dignity of persons created in the image of God." So what does this have to do with your own personal dream identity? Consider your own story. Consider your own truth. Do you have the capacity to own your story no matter what it is and tell it? So the question for reflection here is, how will you tell your story? How will you tell your story? The next strategy is integrity in this dignity lens. The questions we ask are we doing what we say we are doing? Are our actions aligned with our identity? And you ask yourself, am I doing what I say I am doing? That dream identity is often an aspiration, and there is often a gap between that and your lived reality. Shame and vulnerability expert Brené Brown defines integrity as choosing courage over comfort, choosing what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy, and choosing to practice our values rather than simply professing them. This tenet is about accountability. Am I holding myself accountable to the dream identity I aspire to? In the book, I introduce a concept of an integrity audit. Imagine yourself floating, temporarily suspended in air with dignity glasses on, looking over your life. What do you see? Are my actions in line with my dream identity? What gaps do I see? What are the blind spots? The moments of unused or underutilized opportunities, and even potential minefields or triggers. This is an act not to reveal failure, but rather to create a reliable pathway forward for your progress. I know that we are talking about individual stories and dreams, but I cannot help but talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, who preached his last Sunday sermon at the Washington National Cathedral, which is in this image here, where I will have the honor of preaching in just 2 days. I will be preaching at the Washington National Cathedral virtually in memory of him. 52 years ago, he preached this last Sunday sermon. 4 days later, he would be assassinated and permanently etched in our memories as a man who had a dream for his country and for the world, a dream that was rooted in the American dream and the dream that God has for us all, a dream of a nation and world community that values the dignity of every human being. He and countless others conducted such national integrity audits, holding their country accountable to the very dream it articulated for itself. Hovering over, they could see the gaps, the devastating, traumatic gaps in our society, specifically around human dignity. Not only was he able to identify these gaps, but motivated others to partner with him to take up the necessary and difficult work of making progress on closing those gaps. So, I ask you, as you hover your own life, you hover over your own life, what are the gaps that you see? When you ask yourself, am I doing what I say I'm doing? How can I build that bridge to authenticity some more? How can I fill in those gaps? The next part of the dignity lens is nurture. What new behaviors do we need to make? I say become Imagineers. Create an environment of experimentation and innovation. We can't say we want something or aspire to be something or claim we are something without creating an environment for ourselves in which we can truly be nurtured and which we have taken on new behaviors and new choices, or we have tried something new, completely new. We have run an experiment, and they're only experiments. There's never a failed experiment, only opportunities for learning. I like the word Imagineer so much, even though Disney, yes, they use it, but I use it in the sense of a merger truly of your imagination, what you hope for, what you think you need in order to attain this dream, and engineers, how will you get there? What are the sort of tools that you need? What are those new behaviors? What do I need to cultivate and nurture this dream? What do I need to feed and support to bring this dream to fruition? And what choices do I need to make in order to get where I want to go? These choices are not easy. They may feel uncomfortable and scary and downright foreign to who we are, but while they are necessary, know that any anxiety that comes with them should not feel destructive and consuming, but rather life-giving and energizing. So remain open and curious about these new choices that you have to make. I'd like to introduce you here to this person I only recently discovered myself. And his name is Shane Claiborne. And I listened to him speak and I was really struck by what he had to say. He's a Christian activist and an author who is a leading figure in the new monasticism movement. In any case, he had said, we knew what we were against. He was always in protests. He was always out that fired up. He knew what he was against, not what we were for. So he decided, he said, oops, excuse me, let's build. Let's see if I can get back there. Oh, I've skipped around. Where did I go? Aha. See, he asked, what do I need to change? Let's see, let's build something new together. We're going to stop complaining. And he was complaining about the church. He was with all these other folks who were very disenchanted with the church and very much against what he didn't think people were doing right. He saw some gaps in the church. And so he said, I'm going to stop complaining about it and actually create the church that we dreamed of. And he inevitably ended up creating this place called The Simple Way, where he advocated for nonviolence, service to the poor. He opened his doors to the homeless. He said he wanted to live and actually do what he said he wanted to do. He opened his door to the homeless, to any kids who needed help with their homework, who were hungry. He provided food. It was very simple, nothing fancy. He just took the step, and a radical step. And he is the author of a book called The Irresistible Revolution, Living as an Ordinary Radical. In many ways, he took a radical step to really achieve the dream that he wanted. So the reflection for this on this tenet is, what do you see as the imminent choice you must make to jumpstart your own dream identity? What do you need to let go of? What do you need to bring on? What do you need to do right now in order to get to that dream identity? I begin the book with a quote from Alice Walker. She says, look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming. And the last strategy is growth. Undergirding this entire dignity journey is the ability to grow in our capacity, to develop some new competencies, to behave differently, to acquire new skills, to gain new confidence, to be willing to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to grow in our capacity for courage, for vulnerability, for bravery, for curiosity. Sometimes we think we are incapable of doing certain things. It is fearing less, trusting more, and believing more, and recalibrating our expectations. Choose growth. This was another image from that particular project. And again, just so struck by these stories. Karenzi is the perpetrator. He is the male, and Vivienne is the female. She is the survivor. Karenzi, the man, said, "My conscience was not quiet, and when I would see her, I was very ashamed. After being trained about unity and reconciliation, I went to her house and asked for forgiveness. Then I shook her hand. So far, we are on good terms." Vivienne says, "He killed my father and 3 brothers. He did these killings with other people, but he came alone to me and asked for pardon. He and a group of other offenders who had been in prison helped me to build a house with a covered roof. I was afraid of him. Now I have granted him pardon. Things have become normal, and in my mind, I feel clear." It's astonishing. Radical forgiveness. I don't know about you, but that seems extremely difficult for me. But there is that capacity and new competency that we can tap into. There is infinite potential when we look through this dignity lens and what we are capable of doing, even if at first glance we feel like it's an impossible situation. So, lost my cursor, but now I found it. The reflection: what capacity do you need most to grow in? What is that area that you feel you really need to shore up some tools? What new competency can you grow in? Always choose growth. That is a fundamental principle of the dignity lens. So that's it. That's the entire lens. Looking at yourself through the dignity lens. Look and look again at your own dignity. You matter, and your dream matters. Your story matters. More than anything, you are absolutely, absolutely worth it. I know this is a lot of information, and with this webinar feature, we can't have back and forth communication. But I really would love for you, I invite you to reflect on these and to share what you feel now. If you feel anything, I'd love to hear what you are thinking. And when you engage with these tenets and these strategies, know that you will develop some new capacities. You will have new eyes to see yourself with, to see others with. Your own vision will become clearer and your dream identity nearer. Just remember, it's not what you look at that matters. It's what you see.
So we have had some comments offered in the question and answer section. And when you were talking about identity, Janita identified that one of the hardest things is to share what she feels is failures and obstacles. And I'm wondering if you have any comments about how to support yourself when you're feeling that way.
Oh, that is such a human feeling to have when you feel that you have failed in some respects. There are moments of shame and certainly vulnerability. I have to say that Brené Brown has done tremendous work in rewriting the narrative of feeling shame and of feeling vulnerability. And I want to offer to you that when it comes to sharing those parts of our stories, they make us who we are. We have learned certain things from those moments. I often think about those moments as the Good Friday moments of our lives that we tend not to share. We often focus on the Easter Sunday moments of our lives. But it is so important to look at those parts that have been very difficult, because those moments do not describe you, your identity. They simply are a part of your story, and you can learn from them. Toni Morrison, in her haunting book, Beloved, did say at the end of it, after talking about such awful trauma and such pain for the characters in that novel, she wrote a sentence which said, "This is a story not to pass on." And when you read it one way, it says, "This is a story not to pass on to others," not to pass on. But if you read it another way with a new emphasis, this is a story not to pass on. That means we have to look at this story. We must look at this story. We must value the pain, the trauma, the hard parts, the failures. They help us to make us who we are. And who we are today is not who I was yesterday, but who I am today is a part of who I was yesterday. That person helped you become this person today. So I just want to hold on and value those moments.
So I think the integrity lens is one of the ones that's gaining some of the most commentary. And there's some questions Donna was asking, when you do the integrity audit, what tools can be used to avoid creating some sort of a regret fest as you're making that list up?
So like I said in the book, and I share tonight, the act of doing an integrity audit is not about revealing failure. It's about revealing opportunities. This is not about looking back and saying, "Oh my goodness, I regret that I did that," or I'm not living up to it. It's only an opportunity to learn and to say, what can I do to make some progress? You know, I did not talk about the question that I'm most inspired by, which is from the Baptismal Covenant, which is, will you strive? It says the word strive to respect the dignity of every human being. It implies progress, and it implies taking a step forward and maybe a step backward. It implies progress, strive, effort.
There's related elements to this. And so one of the questions that was being asked was, when you're trying to be honest with yourself, how can you, let me get this right. Oops, there we go. How can we avoid the veil of denial while we're trying to be walking that line between not being rigid, but not being obtuse about things that we need to be attentive about?
How can we avoid the line of denial?
The veil of denial, of denying hiding from the things that we don't want to see about ourselves and deflecting our own attitudes about it.
Well, I have to look towards some of these men, and primarily men in these instances. They committed atrocious acts. Atrocious acts. They were able to articulate and put language to those. They could have put silence on those.
What do you think gave them the ability to hold themselves accountable and still being gentle and kind to themselves as they were trying to bring up the courage to be able to have those conversations?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I don't know the inner workings of their minds, but I do know that this is an intentional project, as is in South Africa, to put people in front of other people, to be intentionally vulnerable. and to be intentional about telling the story and all details of the story. Because in articulating the story, as Toni Morrison said, language can bring light to the darkness.
When we started the conversation, you asked about our dream identities, and there was a real mix about people who weren't real sure that they had a dream identity right now. We have a question asking, what advice would you give to someone who feels stuck, who might not know what they want anymore?
That's such a great question. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, what do you want? What do you want out of your life? And maybe it takes some intentionality to sit and think about that, to write it down, draw it out. What are the parts of your life that what are some things that you want? What do you want? It's a hard question, much harder than we think, but an important one.
You and I have talked a lot about storytelling and story sharing. And I think the image of what story do we think we're in, what story do we want to be in, what story are we in, are threads that are a part of what you're capturing. And we have a question here. What happens when you've devoted your life to telling the story of what other people asked of you, of living into standards that others presented rather than reflecting deeply on the reality of yourself? How do you get to that story that you want to be in?
So I thank this person for, one, being so open to share that. And I thank this person for living a life built on what other people's expectations of that person is. Here is an opportunity to consider you, to consider what you want. Again, it's the question, what do you want? Maybe some of those things were okay with you. Maybe they were not. Maybe you had to swallow parts of yourself in order to do these things for other people. And I don't know, I am not a clinician, but I do know that in the work of Dignity Lens, that work is about owning your entire story, all parts of it, and being clear, at least reflecting on what it is that you want, what it is that you aspire to. You know, in some ways, institutions have it easier because they can simply say, this is our mission statement. This is what it is that we hope for. But it's a lot of hard work to actually maintain that and to live into that with authenticity. But we might consider that. You might consider that. What do you want? What do you hope for? What feels good to you? I think that the dream that we all have is about abundant living and living joyfully. And that may take on many different ways, many different manifestations. But I think at the root of it all, it is about living abundantly and living joyfully.
So this might stretch that response just a little. One of our participants is identifying that during the pandemic, there's oftentimes a struggle with identities and a sense of place. And there's a need to reinvigorate our ability to dream and to hope again. We want to have that life abundant, but it's not always easy to pull that up for ourselves. What kind of advice would you offer?
Well, I mean, I'm right there with you. Right now, we're looking around. I painted a picture at the beginning, which I wasn't even a picture. That was reality. We're in some rough times right now. We're in some rough times. But it's sometimes in these difficult moments that are real opportunities and they're ripe for some new changes. I like the idea. I really like the idea and appreciate the idea that when people came up to me afterwards, they said, I wanted to put this dignity lens on myself. I like that idea so much because authentic people make up authentic communities, which make up authentic societies, which make up an authentic world. So if we individually were to just take those moments, maybe each one of us in our own spaces and in our own time could make one difference with another person. We could alleviate some sort of pain from someone else. We could understand someone's anger. We could understand their, while not agreeing. And believe me, the dignity lens does not say, will you respect the dignity of every human being? It does not say, will you love every human being? Will you be polite to every human being? Will you love, will you like, will you agree with every human being? What we're trying to do here is to think about ways in which we can see the humanity in another person. This is the floor height. This is the base. If we can do this much, I don't know, there's so much more down the line that we are capable of doing as a society, even in the midst of all of this violence and division and anger and animosity. There is still hope, and there is still a vast potential in all of this.
So we heard some stories of reparations where people were able to talk to the victim that they had hurt and the healing that came. This question identifies that what happens if one's story includes forebears who helped establish our country and who kept people enslaved? How do you reconcile that in your own identity when it's not something that's yours, but it's something that's a part of your heritage?
Yes, it is a part of our heritage, or it could be a part of your heritage. And my recommendation to that, and part of the lens, the strategy that talks about growth, it talks about the ability to understand, see it for what it is and was, make amends in whatever ways that you can. Look at your life today, look at the lens of what has happened over the generations. Try to understand maybe if there was benefit or a life of benefit or certain allowances that were able to happen. Try to understand from another perspective. This is not about blame or shame or condemnation. This is about looking again, realizing that there's some loss that has to take place. We need to lose some things. We can have loss. And there is gain in some things. I cannot speak in details about your story or your experience, but what I do offer to you is the capacity to learn, understand, deal with the pain of being a part of that heritage, deal with the loss. I think that many people right now on all in this world, they're feeling elements of loss, pain, regret. Things feel like they're being taken away. But I think that we need to recognize these things. What I love about the dignity lens is to look first and see what you see what you understand, and pause and look again. To respect means to look again. So look again and try to understand something new. That question about what area do you need to grow in, and also the question about what can you learn from someone who completely believes something different than you or has had a completely different experience than you. What can you learn from them? It's not easy, but it's doable. I am watching our time here, Julie, and I do want us to be mindful of that and mindful of our participants. But Julie, please go ahead.
There's just one last one. And I think this is important from the integrity perspective. How intentional is our understanding of our dream? The question's asking, would it be a cop-out if you feel like you've just gone with the flow, feeling like you're following the direction God points you, without necessarily intentionally making a dream for your life per se?
Oh, I love that question, because all I have to do is look to the question that inspires the dignity lens. Will you strive to respect the dignity of every human being? The first word, will. Will. Will you? That implies intentionality. We are not flotsam and jetsam, as Dr. King said, floating upon the inevitability of life. We have agency. We have free will. The dignity lens is about intentionality. It's about being deliberate in our choices, in the areas that we have to grow in our communication skills and our ability to tell our stories, ability to create some new direction, about new choices, about imagineering. It is built on deliberation and intentionality. I hope that's helpful. Oh, I'm so glad that so many of you were here this evening. I'm just thrilled. Julie, thank you so much for your assistance. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for your partnership. And I thank you all. And I just hope and pray and hope you live into the very dreams that you have. I hope for more authenticity in all of our lives. And I just want to thank you again for being here this evening.